Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop with Sue. And sorry for the delay. We had some technical difficulties, but we are ready to go to talk about gaming and the issues that have been exacerbated by COVID. So today we are lucky to have Dr. David Greenberg back with us. He is the
Greenfield.
founder. He's the founder of the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction and assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine, where he teaches courses on internet addiction. So, it's not hard to come up with questions for you. What's going to be hard is to cover them because we have so many. So I think the overarching thing to start with is there any kind of parameter you set on this? Like, is there a healthy number of hours, time spent gaming, or is it completely dependent on the child?
Well, there's two answers to that. It's partially dependent on the child, because if you have a child that's gaming 4 hours a day, but they're physically healthy, they're seeing their friends, their academic performance is good, they don't have any issues related to their gaming, and they have a balanced life in other ways. That's not the same as somebody who's gaming 6 or 8 hours a day. Or who's gaming 1 hour a day, but they can't keep up with the rest of their lives. So you have to make a determination based on the person. In general, the rule of thumb, and this is supported by the American Academy of Pediatrics and other organizations, about 2 hours a day seems to be the sweet spot. That's what we recommend, and that's what we shoot for. Now, I can tell you that that's way below the national average in terms of overall screen use, not just video games, but other forms of screens as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, the pandemic didn't help us with that. So parents are
No.
having these massive battles with their kids, and the stories that they're talking about they're so painful to hear because you know that you could be in that in a moment. So, what are there recommendations for how parents can effectively get a kid who can't seem to pull themselves away from the game? Is there anything to do there?
Well, I mean, it depends on why they can't pull themselves from the game. Are they not being able to do it because they have nothing else going on in their life? In which case, the goal is to beef up their real-time living skills and to help them identify non-screen related activities, which of course they're not going to want to do because they get such a hit of dopamine from the game that going out and taking a walk isn't going to do it for them in terms of the excitement that their brain is used to getting. So it's a tough one. It may be necessary to have a period of detox, either full or partial, where they don't have the game for a little bit, where their brain can settle down and they can resume more normal dopamine levels, and they can resensitize to real life, because the game is very intense and very powerful, and it is a game and it's fun, but when it gets to a point where it takes over all of their pleasure, in other words, they can't experience pleasure elsewhere, then it becomes a problem.
So I think a lot of the stories that parents are telling us is that it is taking over their lives, but there is this kind of, people will say parents, be a parent, but a detox where you force them to get rid of that, it's scary. Like, our kids get mean to us,
They do.
violent, and they get.
They do. And, we see that all the time with our patients, and we always advise parents not to just yank it out of the wall and hide, and without some planning. It's not a good idea to do it out of anger, because when we do things out of anger, we react in an impulsive way. So it should be planned. It should be thought out. The kid should be involved in that. In other words, he or she should know that it's happening, and it should be thought through. Yes, they can get aggressive. And obviously, in cases where the kid gets aggressive or threatening or violent or threatening to himself, which we see as well, you have to take that very seriously. You can't ignore it. You can't just say, oh, he's bluffing. You have to deal with it appropriately. And sometimes it means calling the police. Sometimes it means calling an ambulance. There are times that you have to take it seriously, even though you don't know whether they'll do something or not.
Yeah, that is so scary. Does it work to say like one day a week we turn off all technology? Can kids
Yeah,
monitor that?
so that's a tech Sabbath, and we do prescribe that for people. It's a great idea to have one day a week where you have no technology, because it gets the nervous system used to the idea that you can survive, or psychologically, that you can live without it for a day. So that is a good suggestion. The only problem is, when a parent wants their child to limit their technology, the parent has to limit his or her own technology as well. You can't say no screens and then the child walks into your bedroom and you're looking at YouTube on your tablet.
So it's a family thing.
It's kind of a family thing, to some extent. You have to create a a sort of family approach to it. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Okay, so there are these games. I don't know the technical language for it, but like when your mother calls you to dinner, you're going to lose everything that you spent the last 3 hours doing because of the levels or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? I mean, that even for an adult, we'd have such a hard time saying like,
Yeah, I mean,
middle.
there's no way to deal with that effectively, because there's always going to be something like that. So, that's usually an indicator that their life is built around the game, as opposed to the game being built around their life. So that's usually proof in my book that they can't really live a balanced life, because they're building their life around what the game tells them they can do and when they can do it. So that's usually a sign that there's something wrong.
Okay, and so then what?
Then you talk to the person about it. I mean, you have to understand that if there really is an addiction to the game, the child is not going to accept that initially. They're not going to say, "Oh, you're right, I have an addiction." They're gonna be somewhat unwilling to accept that, and the limits and the boundaries have to come from the parents. And that's not a fun thing to do. You're going to have a very unhappy kid for a while. And the other thing is, if there really is an addiction, you really need to get some treatment involved, and somebody that knows something about addiction, particularly internet and technology addiction. You don't want to just bring the child to a therapist or a counselor who says, "Oh, he's depressed, give him his video game and he'll be better," which we see all the time, by the way, all the time.
And if somebody deals with addiction, say alcohol and drug, would they also be able to transfer those same techniques?
Well, maybe. It's a big maybe, because there are differences. For instance, you can deal with, you can have abstinence from alcohol. You can live your life just fine without alcohol in it. Can you really live your life these days without a screen? Is it possible to live without a screen now?
Right.
I don't think it is. I mean, I don't know about you, but there's not a day that goes by that I don't have to be on a screen for something.
Right.
I mean, it might be as simple as, doing
right now. Look at us right now.
Well, this you could probably do differently, but if you need to do banking or do something, you have to go on a screen, unless you want to drive into the bank and do it the old-fashioned way. So
Yeah,
I think that there are a lot of different. So it's a little bit different. So my recommendation would be that they find somebody that has experience, obviously with addiction, but particularly with internet and technology addiction.
And if they want to talk to you more, how do they reach you?
They can certainly call my office at 860-561-8727. And they can go on our website at virtual-addiction.com, virtual-addiction.com. And there's a lot of information for parents on that website, and but each situation is somewhat unique. You can't just plug in a formula for your child and assume that it's the right formula.
Okay, are girls also, are you seeing more and more girls, or is it mostly?
Well, that's an interesting question. No, not in terms of overall technology addiction or video game addiction. I've seen probably for every boy I've seen, for every girl I've seen 100 boys. So it is far and away more common for boys. So now that does not, girls are playing video games and using screens nearly as much as boys, although boys certainly are much higher in terms of video game use. But we don't see them. And it may be that they just don't develop the same level of problem that we see with boys. And there may be some reasons for that with regard to testosterone and addiction. We're not sure what the difference is. I suspect girls are also better at balancing it and or hiding it.
Okay, so money is an issue here because kids are spending money on games and parents don't know. And then they get these really big bills. So are there any suggestions for how do you control that?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one. I mean, I've seen that many times where kids will steal their parents' credit card, or they'll find ways to, get their checking account number, and they'll put these charges either for loot boxes or in-game materials or in-game purchases, or for other things related to their online or gaming use. It's tough because you don't always know that they're doing it. Obviously, you want to lock your credit cards up, and you don't want to leave them out. And you have to also remember that addicts always lie. If your child is addicted to the technology, they will lie about it. And they'll lie what they're doing. They'll lie about what they're doing, and they'll lie about the credit card that you can't find. So you have to kind of not, and they don't do it maliciously. Nobody wakes up in the morning and decides they want to be an addict, and nobody chooses to be an addict, but they do have to choose not to be. So the only way you can choose not to be is to be confronted with the impact of what they're doing. So you would treat it like anything else. There has to be consequences for their behavior. But if an addict stole a credit card or money to pay for an opiate, you would not be surprised. It's not that different in terms of the way the brain sees it.
So at that moment, I mean, it really is a cry for help at that moment, right? Like
if they're stealing to buy things in the game, that's telling you that their morals and their values and their judgment is being impaired to a point where they're doing things that are not within the norm for them.
All right. How much does the content matter?
In terms of the game, or in terms of what they're doing online, or I'm not.
Well, are you more concerned if a kid is watching violence and engaging in violence, or is the addiction impacted by the content?
Yeah. So the research on video game violence is mixed. There's lots of different information about it. Overall, there seems to be some negative impact for watching violent video games, particularly around the desensitization to violence, and it doesn't cause violence. We don't know that, but we do know that it desensitizes them to the experience of violence, and so there's some data to support that. In general, I probably do worry a bit more about violent video games because they are an assault on the nervous system, and they do create this desensitization that I was just talking about. So I do have some concern about it. But you can also become quite addicted to other types of games that are fantasy-based, that are not necessarily violence, or what are called platform games. There's a lot of different types of games that are not particularly violent.
So the addiction might not be dependent on the content, but
no, it is not. No, the addiction is really based on the medium, the addictive nature of the game, and the games are designed to be addictive, by the way. They want them to be addictive. They want your kid, or they want the user, to stay on that game as long as possible. Now, they would say that that's an indication of making it entertaining. They use the word entertaining. I use the word addiction. So, it's, a movie is entertaining, but it's over in 2 hours. Right. A video game is never over.
And is that a compelling discussion with your kid, that actually someone's trying to control you?
Yeah, the kids do respond to what we call psychoeducation or neurobiologic education, where you teach them about what's going on in the brain. Right now, I'm writing a new book called The Dummy's Guide to Technology Addiction. And it's going to go into great detail about how to talk to your kids, as well as other situations in dealing with technology addiction. But explaining to them how it works addictively in the brain is useful, assuming you know how it works. But to the brain, there is no difference depending on the addictive substance or behavior. In other words, the brain sees cocaine just like a video game and vice versa. I'm not saying they're the same, but in terms of the process of addiction in the limbic system of the brain, they are the same.
So some of the responses that parents are seeing is that the behavior during the game might be a lot of swearing and aggression during the game, and then it starts to seep into the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So do you say to your kid, you can play a game, just not that one?
I've never found that to be particularly useful because they find ways that aggression seeps into just about any game. If they're playing violent or aggressive video games, or what we call first-person shooter games, they're going to get aggressive and violent, and they're going to talk about it. And they're talking to their friends while they're playing over Discord or an other medium over headphones. So they're interacting, and they're into the game, and they're in that world. And I don't know if you've ever looked at a video game on a screen, especially nowadays. They're incredibly immersive. So you're in that world. There really is no other world when you're in it.
You just feel the pain of parents dealing with it right now because it's just so scary. Like you just want to say, "Don't do it," it's not that simple.
But remember, adolescents have a sense of invulnerability, and they also don't have a well-developed frontal cortex. So they are at the highest risk for addiction to anything.
Yeah, and this is no different. Anybody on here who has a question themselves, put it into the comment. Ola, I'm going to try to pronounce your name. Ola Watoyan says thanks. And then I want to just, before we finish up here, I want to talk a little bit about, is there a place, like, even if your kid's addicted, can parents make a difference in that addiction, or are they always going to need to seek outside help to get over this?
Oh, no. I mean, there are times that sometimes you'll need some outside help to get it started and to get a plan in place. But no, they won't necessarily always need help. I mean, most of the patients that we've consulted with or treated, they do get better, and they do much better, and they get back on track, and they go back to school, or whether it's high school or college, and they're doing quite well. So they may just need a little bit of tweaking and a little bit of help temporarily to get back on track, but it's treatable. It's totally treatable.
And what would be your first suggestion for parents? Like, is the 24-hour family?
I mean, I have to be honest with you. I can't make a general suggestion that's true for every person, because there really are unique circumstances to every case. And, as a doctor, you can't make a broad prescription about what to do, because in that there's going to be one case where that won't work. So I would say the first thing to do is consult with somebody that knows what they're doing, that can guide you, especially if you think your child has an addiction. If it's escalated to a point where it's impacting his or her life, and it's affecting their schoolwork or their self-care or their sleep or their social relationships, that's when you would seek a consultation and allow that person to help you structure the treatment. And it may not be treatment that's required. They may just help you set appropriate limits and boundaries with your kids.
Okay, I did forget one question that came in from a parent, which is, this whole idea of who are they playing with, and what if they're playing with a pedophile trying to, bully them?
Yeah, there is data to suggest that pedophilic predators and individuals that do prey upon children will at times frequent sites that attract children and adolescents. And the truth is, you do not know who's on the other side of that handle, because they all use video game handles, and they're not their names. So you really don't know who they're talking to, and there really is no way to know for sure. In most cases, I would say they are talking to other adolescents and young adults who are using the game, but you don't have a way of knowing.
And are there settings or anything to just say you can only play with people that we approve or something like that?
There are settings. There are settings on, well, it depends. I don't know if there's on the game or on the device itself, but there are some settings. It can get quite complicated, and one of the things that we recommend is that you talk to an IT person. A lot of parents try to do all this themselves, but it often gets so complicated, they end up in the weeds pretty quickly. So our recommendation, and what we do in our clinic, is we have an IT person that works with us, and he helps us structure all of these blocks and limits and boundaries and what software and apps to use, because it can be quite technical. And although a lot of parents fancy themselves to be very savvy, in general, we're not.
So where do you start looking for that IT person? Is it through a store chain or something? Or?
Well, that's a good question. I start because we have one that works with us. So I would say you find an IT person that understands how to use software. You'd have to ask them, do they have any experience in blocking software, monitoring software? Things like, their Custodio is one, and I'm trying to, there's a couple of others.
Well, so tell me, someone is asking, how do we explain to teenagers that the games they play are addictive? Do you have on your website, like if someone wants to dig deeper? So
yeah.
Tell me the site again. I'm going to put it in the comments.
Virtual, VIRTUAL -addiction.com. Virtual dash.
So I'm going to suggest you go there. And then one last question is, do you recommend children with mental health issues to have a limit on screen time? Are they more likely to be addicted to games?
Yeah, I think actually every child should have limitations on screen time. And if they do have mental health issues, they do have a higher potential for developing issues because of the social isolation. And there is evidence to support that it increases depression and possibly social anxiety as well. So I think you need to look at the screen as a powerful, the way you have to see a screen is that it's a psychoactive drug, and it is a digital drug, and that it has to be dosed like any other drug and has to be seen as a powerful way to change the brain.
And now is kind of a good time because all during the pandemic, we were kind of forgiving our kids for a lot of bad behavior, but we've got weather on our side right now and hopefully some vaccinations that are working. Dr. David Greenfield, I hope you'll come back when you have your book. We'd love to talk about it more with you.
I'm writing it as we speak. It should be done this summer, hopefully.
Excellent. Okay, so hopefully we'll be bringing him back on to talk about all of his advice for parents. And thanks so much for being here with us today.
You're very welcome. Good to see you.